What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about something I've been wanting to talk about here on the channel for quite some time, and that is the new live action series for One Piece. So I meant to get this video up a lot sooner, to be completely honest, but I just wasn't feeling YouTube in the last week or so, to be completely and utterly honest. Been a little bit discouraged about it, view counts and all that jazz, and it just didn't motivate me to sit down, write down notes, film a video, and be fake about it. But in a way, I'm kind of glad that I took a little bit of time, just a few days to myself, and let this series marinate with me. If you guys have been watching this channel for quite some time, whether it's been on random live streams or when I've covered other anime things, you know that I've mentioned One Piece from time to time. And One Piece, without a doubt, is not only my favorite anime, but it is my favorite show of all time. And when I heard that we were going to be getting a live action series on Netflix, I was beyond concerned and beyond worried, and I think rightfully so. Unfortunately, anime live action adaptations are just riddled with failure after failure after failure. And when we look back at the various adaptations that we've gotten, they've usually been pretty piss poor. They usually have just completely lost track of what the series was about, what the source material is all about. And a lot of times it's sometimes about keeping the imagery within the movie or the show or whatever they decide to do, and completely throwing the story to the wayside. So with One Piece not only being my favorite anime, but being my favorite show of all time, I was genuinely concerned. Now, what gave me a little bit of hope as time went on is it turned out that the creator of One Piece, the manga over in Japan, and the anime, Oda Ichiro, was actually going to be involved with the process, involved with casting, involved with something in terms of the actual production. Now, in terms of online, IMDb, and other sites, I couldn't find that he was necessarily credited for the writing in this show itself. Of course, this is based on his writings and based on his own characters, and he was involved in the production to some extent, which you can definitely see in the show, but he wasn't actually one of the credited writers from episode to episode that you can find online. But once I heard his name was involved, I was really excited. It gave me some hope, but I was still fearful. I think at the end of the day, when you watch an anime like One Piece that's over 1,000 episodes, and I only watch it in Japanese personally, I love watching anime in its original language, subtitled, and quite frankly, I don't really like watching the anime One Piece in English because I just don't really feel like the voices really match the characters all that well. I was already concerned just going into this because I knew the series was going to be in English, and I don't like how a lot of things that are said in One Piece are said in English, so I knew I was starting at a disadvantage. I think if you're somebody who has never seen One Piece before, or you are a fan of the American dub and you just are looking forward to a live action One Piece, this may be a little bit more easily digestible for you. But I know that the people who have had the hardest time with enjoying this series, at least the people I've spoken to, have been the longtime fans, specifically of just the original voice actors, just simply because there are certain things that are said in Japanese that sound so cool and have a specific vibe that fit the medium of anime that don't always work so well in English. Most notably, the characters in this show will use different, superpowers and different abilities, and will say the move of what it is that they're doing, say the attack that they're doing, and it just comes off extra cheesy in English, whereas in Japanese it just kind of works. Anyway, all this to say, I'm a huge fan of the series, and I was worried going into this without a doubt. We've had things like Dragon Ball Evolution, and even things like the Death Note live action movies and the Attack on Titan ones, that just never have lived up to the hype, lived up to the excitement, lived up to the story, and it sometimes have just flat out been disgraceful to the original source material. But here we are now talking about One Piece, and like I said, I meant to get this video up sooner, but I'm kind of glad I let it marinate with me, because when I first saw the trailer for this, I honestly wasn't very impressed. I thought that it looked really nice when I started seeing some of the behind the scenes stuff that was coming out and the trailer itself in terms of production. And I'll start this off by saying that I think that's where this really shined for me, was being able to see a series of One Piece that takes about the first 50 episodes or so and smashes it into 8 episodes and is able to have this nearly $140 million budget. Yeah, I was excited on that premise alone, because while I was watching it, it was undoubtedly awesome to see this series that I know and love, see this world of One Piece that I'm absolutely addicted to, being able to see it on the big screen or on the screen in such a nice way. Really well done on the production value side of things. I think without a doubt was absolutely fantastic. So when I saw the trailer, when I saw some behind the scenes footage of them building actual sets and being able to see One Piece coming to life, I was really thrilled by that, and I think that that's without a doubt what kept me engaged as I was kind of having some hardships with how I felt about the series overall. If you guys have seen some stuff online, then you've seen that it's actually been really well praised. It's been very widely praised. It's got good reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and other sites by not only the critics, but also by fans. And I would argue that it's definitely one of the better made anime adaptations of all time. And as a huge One Piece fan, I guess I'm just happy that this weekend that it came out, just so happened to be a huge weekend for the franchise as a whole. There was a huge new installment into the manga, there was a huge new episode in the anime, and then we get this series. So on all fronts, in 3 different mediums, One Piece was kicking ass, and as a fan of the brand, I feel like I just have to be excited for that. And the idea that this series is probably going to bring some new eyes who are curious about it now to the anime. Now, this series started in the 90s, the anime, so of course, what's being adapted here started quite some time ago and is in a slower, much more less flashy time in anime. It's in a much more slower period of One Piece's storytelling, but without a doubt, it's one of my most charming and most beloved eras of One Piece as it sets up the whole story. I love those early episodes of One Piece, even though they're a little bit slower and the animation doesn't hold up, but undoubtedly it was really cool to see them done in a little bit more of a quick-paced way that looks really good. However, as I mentioned before, this is about the first 50 episodes or so, 44 episodes or so, crammed into 8 episodes, which unfortunately in doing that you lose something, and certain things had to be changed, and my One Piece purist side was completely struggling, I won't lie. Also, as I mentioned, I specifically watched this show in Japanese, and I was struggling already going into this because I knew I was going to have to hear these characters say things I love hearing them say in Japanese, but in English, and my gripes there were kind of still prevalent. I was struggling with the idea of hearing a lot of these super moves that they use or just certain things that they say in English because I already don't like watching One Piece, the anime, in English. So that was something that never really went away while I was watching the series. I just don't prefer One Piece and its world in English. I just think it sounds and just comes off way cooler in Japanese. That's my personal opinion. You know, no hate towards anybody who enjoys watching any anime dubbed. It's just not my personal preference. I just don't think it sounds as good. And so going into this, I was struggling with that. And as I was progressing through the series, it was something that often took me out of moments that I think were meant to be a little bit cooler. However, like I mentioned before, it was undoubtedly amazing to be able to see this franchise brought to live action with such a high budget. They could easily have made this just a weak adaptation visually, at least, even if they would have followed the story. And I also got to praise them a little bit here because they definitely take the base, narrative that we do have across those first 50 episodes, and it's present here. Now, my issue with the series overall is that I am torn on how I feel about it, because on one hand, it was incredible to see One Piece in live action at such a high budget with a lot of cast members that I'm going to praise. We're going to go through a lot of the big cast members and the iteration of the anime and how I felt about this adaptation. But I can't deny that I did enjoy a lot about how I enjoyed it looked, how some of the action was, how the use of some of the One Piece music was really nice and put a smile on my face, and how by the time I got to the end, I can honestly say that it grew on me more than it did while I was watching the show. But I'm still torn on it. There's still things about it that I didn't love. There's still some changes I wasn't crazy about, and there are still some things that I genuinely think that just are never really going to adapt well to live action. But there is a damned if you do, damned if you don't when it comes to what they actually chose to include from the anime and how people would have received it, whether they had done it or not. So like I mentioned, we have the first 50 episodes crammed into 8 episodes, and you just lose something in that. The reality of the situation is you lose a lot of story that does come from that. Now, as I mentioned before, those first 50 episodes or so are a little bit slower in comparison to the rest of One Piece. It's an over 1,000 episode anime, and one of the absolute charms and the unique energy of what One Piece is the fact that you can follow this one narrative that started in the 90s that has some, weaker anime animation and slower storytelling, and continue on with the same voice actors getting up to modern day animation with big, over the top, beautiful, vibrant colors and beautiful action, and the storytelling just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and more fast paced. And so you get to follow this one narrative that really just grows in this immaculate way. There are not other series that have done this. There are other big, long-running anime series like Dragon Ball that started with Dragon Ball, that went to Dragon Ball Z, and now, of course, we have Dragon Ball Super, where it looks incredible. But those are individual series that are continuing off of one another that came out years later. Whereas with One Piece, you're going episode by episode by episode, and as you continue on, the animation, the storytelling, just the writing altogether, the look, the feel, the vibe, everything just gets better and better and better as you get to the more modern day One Piece. And so while I do appreciate how consistent they kept the story here in terms of it being accurate to what happens in those first 50 episodes, I just do think there are, things that they had to omit that I didn't really like that they omitted. There were characters that I wish that were still included. There were characters that didn't really have a whole lot to do. And I think the thing I struggled with the most is that when it comes to anime and when it comes to One Piece, part of what I love about it is that you're going from island to island with all these characters that we slowly start to know, and they have like mini arcs, and then later on we get into much bigger arcs where they spend time on those islands and we get to know the characters on that island over the course of multiple episodes. So by the time you get to the end of that little arc or that island arc, you really do get to kind of like start hating the villain on a new level and get to see them getting taken down later on. And a lot of times in anime, fights will take multiple episodes. And while I do agree there are maybe some fights that take a little bit too long, I think for the most part, you lose a little bit of that with kind of cramming all of it into 8 episodes. There are villains in this series that are much bigger parts, or at least on screen much longer in the anime, and have much more character development and allow you to kind of hate them a lot more as time goes on, that ultimately are just kind of introduced and taken out at the end of an episode in this iteration of the story, which kind of took away from some of how I felt about these villains and some of these storylines. But again, it's undoubtedly really cool to see the really good costume design, the production value behind the overall production. It was great to see One Piece in live action done really well in terms of visuals. Even if I did struggle with some of the things that they omitted, even if I did struggle with some of the things that they brush over, and even if I felt like I genuinely just didn't really fully connect to this iteration of the characters, I'm far more in love, of course, over 1,000 episodes with the versions of the anime. I just love those versions of the characters. I just love the way that they're portrayed, and there are emotional moments in those first 50 episodes with these characters that are replicated here that ultimately just didn't always work for me. And we're going to get into that with individual characters as we go on. I just wanted to kind of wrap up my thoughts here by saying that I'm torn on the series overall. By the time I got to the end of it, I can genuinely say it grew on me just to have an alternate iteration of One Piece, to be able to have One Piece, my favorite anime of all time, finally get a live action adaptation and it be one of the better ones, one that's a little bit more true to the anime. But again, you do lose something, and just taking so many episodes and cramming them into 8, I knew that was going to be a struggle. I guess I appreciate that they made it a series versus making it a movie like a lot of adaptations do, where they take, a 20, 30, 40 episode series and cram it into an hour and 40, an hour and 50 movie, and it almost never works. Or you have something like Dragon Ball Evolution that put Goku in high school, and it's almost like they never watched the original source material at all. So as you can tell, I'm torn on how I feel about the series. I think there was a lot that was really well done. I think there are some great performances here. I think there are some great I think there are some great adapted elements without a doubt, and I think it's definitely one of the more true to the source material live action anime adaptations that we've had. And on one level, I just have to be grateful for that as a One Piece fan. And again, I'm happy to know that it succeeded not only in the anime this weekend, but in the live action form, as well as in the manga as well. There was a big release for all of them, and it kind of just took over on all levels. So I'm happy for the brand. I'm happy for Oda, the creator, to see his baby growing and growing and growing, and I'm sure that this brought new fans into the limelight. And what I could say right here, genuinely, I'm wearing this One Piece Luffy shirt right now, and I just really genuinely want to say that if you enjoyed this live action series and you've, maybe dabbled in the anime here and there, but maybe you just never took the plunge because maybe the beginning seems a little slow for you, or you just don't like how long the show is. I mean, if you trust my opinion at all, maybe you don't know who I am and you clicked on this video, just maybe take from my passion. One Piece for me is one of the most unique series of all time. It's without a doubt one of the greatest shows that has ever existed. It's my favorite show of all time. I've cried more watching One Piece than anything else. I have watched the show on countless occasions when I was feeling down, when I just needed something to give me chills, something to make me feel emotional. One Piece was there. I have so many fond memories of sitting around watching it with my fiance and our roommate Rob, watching it with my mom, watching it with co-workers and friends, and getting friends and co-workers into the series. I have gotten so many people into the show that were like, yeah, it's kind of cute, I like it at first. They weren't crazy about it, who just kept on and kept on and kept on and are now addicted. I'm not just saying that to blow smoke up One Piece's ass. I genuinely believe in One Piece. I got my mom, who's never seen an anime in her whole life, to sit through the early One Piece with me and started watching it on her own. And now she's near, I think, like in the 800s or 900s of the episodes, and she loves it. My mom, who's never watched another anime even since, she hasn't really watched anime series from what I know. She just started to fall in love with One Piece, with Luffy and the rest of the gang. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my thoughts on various actors and characters here and how I felt they were portrayed. But yeah, I'm torn on the series. I don't think I necessarily loved it. I don't think I necessarily loved it as a live action adaptation. I'm going to continue to watch the anime. This only made me want to go back and revisit those early episodes of the One Piece anime, to be completely honest. But as I've had time to sit with it, I appreciate, as a One Piece fan, again, that we got probably one of the better made live action anime adaptations of all time for my favorite series of anime. So without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on the cast. And this is where we're going to start to see a little bit of a up and down for me. Let's start with Luffy. I'm wearing his shirt right now. Love Monkey D. Luffy. Not only is he my favorite character in One Piece, but he is my favorite character of all time, maybe. One of my favorite characters of all time. Of course, if you know I'm a huge Star Wars fan, you know that a lot of the Star Wars characters ring incredibly true in my heart. But outside of something like all the things I'm a super big, long-time fan of when it comes to Star Wars or Marvel or DC and stuff like that, Luffy is one of my favorite characters of all time. I absolutely love the character. I have this Straw Hat logo tattoo right here. I put a picture of it so you can see it better on my arm. And I want to get a Luffy tattoo. I just love the character so much. So going into this right out of the gate, the kid who's playing Luffy had big sandals to fill for me. Now, there are videos you can find online, some featurettes that Netflix has released, showing the original voice actress who plays Luffy putting the hat on the new kid, as well as Oda, the original creator, doing the same, and a separate video where he tells them that you are the Luffy that I always envision when I draw the character, that I can't imagine anybody else playing the character other than you. And he gets really emotional, which is crazy to hear Oda say, and I wish I fully agreed. Now, that's not to say that my opinion is, the end all be all on that. I think the kid is precious in a lot of ways. I think this guy who played Luffy is fantastic. Inaki Godoy, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I think that he absolutely seems ecstatic, in love with the idea of playing Luffy. I watched the trailer reaction that him and the rest of the cast did, where he was tearing up just watching the trailer, and I just have nothing but love for the kid. I think he is, got a lot of passion for One Piece. It's clear, and he got the stamp of approval from the creator and from the original voice actress of Luffy. And I could never sit here and be like, well, that's complete trash, and I don't think that he deserves that. While I don't necessarily agree that he was the Luffy that I really envisioned in my head, and there were times where I just didn't feel like the Luffy I'm in love with, I think undoubtedly I appreciated his approach to the character. I appreciated his passion behind it, and that much was clear to me. Now, one issue I have across the board for a lot of these cast members and this movie and the show overall is that some of the acting felt like just that, acting, and that's where I struggled with this series. While the show does a good job of balancing, some of the whimsical, cheesy nature of One Piece and some serious tones, I ultimately just found a lot of times that a lot of these characters and a lot of these actors felt like caricatures of the characters more so than actually feeling like the characters. And I kind of felt like that at times when it comes to Luffy in this series. This is not the Luffy that I genuinely love, to be completely honest, but again, I just really appreciate the amount of passion and love and excitement that this kid had to be cast in this role. And while he's not necessarily what I envisioned when it comes to Luffy, and he didn't really hit all the nails on the top of the head for me, there wasn't everything about his performance that really worked for me. There was times where I kind of cringed at like some of the line delivery and some certain moments that just didn't feel super Luffy to me. I do again appreciate the amount of passion and the energy and excitement that the kid had, even if I just genuinely didn't feel like he was the greatest Luffy in my opinion. I think that there's times where he really shined, especially near the end of the series, but there were other times where I just felt again like a caricature of a character I love versus truly feeling like Luffy. Then you have Emily Rudd as Nami, beautiful actress who did a fantastic job, I think, playing the character. And right out of the gate, as I was starting to struggle with some of the cast members playing certain characters, she was the one that I found myself the most like, okay, this feels like Nami. I really enjoyed the look of her. I will say one issue that this show had for me where a lot of the wigs were just not great, while the production value on the costume design and practical makeup and set design and locations used were, I thought, really great and good CGI throughout the course of the series. I struggled with the wig department, whether it was in flashbacks for the younger iterations of our characters or just older iterations of characters throughout the course of the series. The wigs, without a doubt, were a weak part of this series, and I felt that way when it came to Nami in this series. But I really enjoyed what Emily Rudd brought to the character. I thought that she very well captured what Nami was, and while she's not necessarily still my Nami, I thought that she was one of the better cast roles in the series. Now we have to talk about McKinley as Zorro. Zorro is one of the most badass anime characters of all time, one of my favorite characters from One Piece, and I think one of most people's favorite characters from One Piece. He's really over the top and badass and stoic and cool, and he just gives off badass on all levels. And while he can have funny, charming, cute moments from time to time, he's ultimately a really deep voice, just badass fucking monster. And I just never got that from McKinley here. I think he looks the part. I think when you look at stills of his character, of his iteration of Zorro, again, the costume design is good, the makeup, the hair, all that stuff I thought was solid. I don't necessarily think he didn't look the part. I do think he looked the part, but I struggled with his version of Zorro. It goes back to what I was saying before about it feeling like caricatures of these characters. It felt like he was trying to put on a deeper voice than he actually had, and I feel like had they cast another actor that had a deeper voice, it would have felt a little bit more like Zorro to me, whereas he just didn't ever feel nearly as badass as Zorro is to me, and I just ultimately really struggled with this iteration of Zorro. I'm not gonna lie. There were moments, he had his moments that I was really into the way he looked. There was moments of action that I was really into, and there was moments with charming little smiles like Zorro does in the anime that I was excited to see. But I ultimately, by the time I'm filming this review, days after having seen the series and having watched all those episodes, while I enjoyed parts of Zorro in this series, he ultimately just never hit the nail on the head for what I really enjoy about Zorro. Then you have Jacob Romero as Usopp, and I think for the most part he did a pretty solid job as the character. I think when it comes to the character of Usopp, I was really curious to see how they were going to depict him, because he's a very specific character. He's very fearful, and he lies all the time, and he wants people to think that he's way cooler than he is. And on one hand, I do think that Jacob Romero does a good job here. On the other hand, I think that they, on the writing side of things, never really leaned into how truly fearful Usopp is. There are moments that showcase that for sure, but I just never really fully got Usopp's character the way that it's portrayed in the anime, even in the American English version. I never really got that vibe from this iteration of Usopp. And another thing that I was really interested in, or something that just caught all of our eyes while we were watching it was that this actor doesn't necessarily have a large nose. Not to say that they should have put a prosthetic on him to give him the ridiculously long nose that Usopp has, but one of the biggest running gags when it comes to One Piece and Usopp is how big his nose is. There's a whole segment later on in this show where he pretends to be a character named Soge King, and he's wearing a mask, and the mask has a huge long nose on it. He's pretending to be this character and trying to fool others into thinking that he's not Usopp. And the joke lands and is so funny in the anime because it's so clearly Usopp. And I don't fully know how they're going to pull that off here without having the nose. I think that the nose is a absolutely pivotal part of Usopp, and I feel like had they found an actor with maybe a slightly bigger nose, or maybe just given him a slight prosthetic to kind of make it just a little bit abnormal, it could have just made it a little bit more funny, and I think would have just felt more like the character. But for the most part, I think that Jacob Romero does a good job as the character. Again, he's just still not my Usopp. And then we got to talk about Taz Skylar, who plays the last of the Straw Hats that we see here, and that is Sanji. And I think for the most part, he does a good job. He definitely looks the part. I thought that he, definitely looked like Sanji and had moments that definitely felt like Sanji. I will say there are some emotional moments in the anime that just weren't pulled off as well here. And again, I think some of it has to do with the fact that the show is kind of introducing a bunch of characters and, introducing villains that are defeated by the end of the episode and kind of moving on. And the anime takes its time with these characters. So when these big moments happen for these characters within this first 50 episodes, there's a lot more emotion behind it. I feel like the voice acting is a lot more emotional. And so there were moments when it came to Sanji here that I wish that I felt more emotional and more attached to his character. Though I did appreciate how good he looked as the character and how good he played the character in moments. I think that there's some solid potential with this cast, even if I didn't love all of it. But again, it comes back to how I feel about just the way that they omitted certain things, and it's tough. A part of me doesn't want this series to exist, and another part of me appreciates that it does, and that it's as accurate as it is in comparison to other live action anime adaptations. And real quickly, let's go ahead and go through some of the other big cast members here and kind of get into my thoughts on them. You have Vincent Reagan as Garp, who I thought was really solid as the character of Garp. Of course, he is Luffy's grandfather. But what bothered me about how they introduced Garp into the series and how they utilized him is that they introduced that he is Luffy's grandfather to the cast and to the rest of the crew really early, just a few episodes into the series, when that doesn't happen in the anime until about 200 and something episodes into the series, deep into the show, which I found it to be far more impactful when it happens than to be completely honest. I feel like you have this character who's been searching after Luffy that has been appearing throughout the course of the show, and by the time you find out that he's this guy who's been searching for Luffy this entire time is his grandfather, deep into the show, and the rest of the crew finds out, it definitely it feels way more impactful. And so when we were all kind of shocked when we were watching the series and they announced that he was his grandfather so early into the show, because we already knew that means that they were going to be making some big changes in the narrative, which were some of the things I didn't really enjoy. Morgan Davies as Kobe, I think for the most part does a really solid job of playing the character. The character in the anime is maybe a little bit more annoying and maybe not as willed as the Kobe that we see here, but for the most part, when it comes to some of the changes that they made, I do think that Kobe's involvement a little bit more in the story at this point, and some of the moments between him and Luffy are really strong. I've always loved the Kobe-Luffy relationship in the anime, and I think that for the most part, Morgan Davies does a good job of playing the character of Kobe. Aiden Scott, who plays Helmeppo, had me a little bit when the show started. I wasn't really crazy about him at first, but by the time we got to the end of the series, I can genuinely say I think for the most part he captures the essence of the character. And while I enjoy the Luffy and Kobe relationship, I've always really enjoyed the Helmeppo and Kobe relationship that builds as time goes on throughout the course of the series. So, if they do continue on with the second season, I am curious to see what they choose to do with that. Jeff Ward as Buggy is one that I feel like kind of grew on me as the series was coming to a close, but at first I wasn't crazy about it. Buggy's a huge character in the series that has some really pivotal moments in the franchise later on, hundreds of episodes into the anime. And for the most part, I do like how the character looked. I wasn't necessarily in love with his depiction, but as I got to the end, I kind of grew to enjoy it a little bit more. I think that as I was letting go of the fear that this was going to be absolute dog shit, I kind of started to enjoy his performance a little bit more. Again, with all of these, I enjoy the anime version substantially more. But yeah, you know, I didn't mind Buggy too much in this show. I thought for the most part, he did a good job of depicting the kind of shithead character that Buggy is. And without a doubt, one of the things that impressed me the most was McKinley Belcher III as Arlong. Now, Arlong Park in the actual anime was the first arc that really gripped me in a way that made me think, okay, this show is getting serious. This is the arc that really hones specifically on the character of Nami, and he's the big villain at the end of this season, but he's a huge villain in the anime itself. Now, they introduced Arlong into the story substantially sooner. There's a character named Don Krieg, who we see briefly in this live action adaptation, but is taken out early by Mihawk, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But yeah, he was supposed to be the villain, Don Krieg, that Luffy and the gang fought at the Baratie, which is where they get Sanji. And they ended up omitting that whole thing entirely and having Arlong come to the Baratie earlier, or just showing up into the story earlier. So there were some things that were changed narratively that I didn't necessarily like, but I guess they needed to kind of start to introduce Arlong a little bit more to make him feel like a big threat for the final part of the season. But in the actual anime, he doesn't actually appear until all of our characters get to Arlong Park. But then again, we spend way more episodes at Arlong Park than we do in this show. But for the most part, I'm happy with the portrayal of Arlong. I do think they could have maybe CG'd him up a little bit, but I did appreciate that all the fishmen in the show were all done practically, all practical makeup and costuming that I thought all really looked really good. I think Arlong, without a doubt, was one of the best looking in terms of special effects, and I really thoroughly enjoyed the performance that was given here. I think that he did a good job of capturing the essence of who Arlong is, even if I think he's more badass in the anime. Craig Fairbass as Zeph, I thought did a great job. You know, that was a character too that I was very curious to see how they were going to pull off, and was without a doubt one of those that I felt really accurate. It felt like a very accurate depiction of the character. Again, they make some changes to him and Sanji's backstory that I don't necessarily think were necessary, but the core of their backstory is there, and for the most part, I think he gave a pretty solid performance. Stephen John Ward, who played Mihawk, that without a doubt was probably my favorite of the things that was adapted in this show. I think he did a fantastic job of capturing who and what Mihawk is from the animated show, from the anime, completely encapsulated the character in the show, and the costume design and set design around him and the sword and everything I thought was fantastic. Really thoroughly enjoyed his iteration of Mihawk, and yeah, definitely without a doubt one of the biggest standouts when it comes to any of the adaptations in this series. Then we have Alexander Mariadis as Klahadore, or Captain Kuro, and I think for the most part he did a good job. He's the butler in the, a few episodes deep on Usopp's island, and for the most part I think he really captured the essence of the character. He was one of those characters, again, that I think the anime does a phenomenal job of making you feel like he's kind of just like a nice guy for the first few episodes that you're meeting him, and then ultimately revealing that he is the bad guy. Whereas this show doesn't have a lot of time to do that because they cram it into 8 episodes. So you have this guy who pretty clearly seems like the villain right out of the gate, and then they defeat him by the time, we're getting to the end of the episode pretty much, and that's about it. There were definitely things about his iteration of the character that I thought were absolutely true to the anime version. I just wish that they had given his character more time to breathe, which is, I think, a big criticism I have of the series overall. There was just too many arcs that they crammed into 2 little episodes that I'm sure worked for a lot of people, but ultimately for me just made some of these moments just feel like hollow reenactments of scenes that I enjoy way more in the anime. You have Peter Gadiote, who played Shanks, and I think for the most part, by the time I got to the end of the series, I enjoyed his iteration of Shanks. But Shanks is a character that I think should have been played by an Asian man. I don't know why, I just always visualized Shanks that way. And while I do think his performance is solid, I just never was fully in love with this iteration of Shanks the same way I am with the character from the anime, which of course is just a trend at this point. And that's going to be my thoughts on the cast members. There's a lot of other little smaller characters, side characters that appear. If I sat here and talked about all of them, I'd take up your entire day. And this video is already going way longer than I intended it to. But I love One Piece, as you can already tell. I wanted to talk about it in depth. I wanted to compare things and see how I felt about them. And I feel good kind of just ranting all of this off. To wrap this up, what I could say is that I think that the One Piece live action series on Netflix is a rushed and subpar iteration of the story from the anime, in my opinion, but it does have its perks. I think that for the most part, it's an incredibly well-made series that has great production value, and it was undoubtedly awesome as a longtime One Piece fan to see these moments done in live action with fantastic costume design, set design, CGI, and for the most part, some pretty solid performances. While I struggled with the interpretations of some of these characters that I know and love throughout the course of the series, and I was kind of rolling my eyes at a lot of it throughout the first couple of episodes, by the time I got to the end of the episodes, I was like, all right, I'm happy that One Piece finally has a live action adaptation, and that it is definitely one of the better live action anime adaptations that we've ever had. So on that level, as a fan of One Piece, I'm glad that it didn't get some dog shit, terrible live action adaptation like Dragon Ball or so many others have. I'm never going to stop watching the anime, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. I have a bad feeling that, similar to things like Cowboy Bebop and plenty of other Netflix series, that this may end up getting canceled. Maybe we'll get a season 2, maybe we won't get a season 2, maybe we'll get a season 2 but not get a season 3. Who knows? Netflix is very all over the place with that. But what I can say is, if we do continue, I just hope that they don't make as many changes to some of the story beats and introducing characters at different times. I think that the anime does a fantastic job of, taking this long journey that you can really just flesh out characters on, and I just don't want to feel like this is just the rushed iteration of that has these really impactful moments that have completely given me just full-on emotional moments watching the anime that just feel like subpar versions in live action. I felt like that with a lot of the big emotional moments in this series, even if I could appreciate how well done a lot of other things were. I didn't love the series, but I love One Piece, and I just want to see One Piece succeed. So on that level, I am excited to know that a lot of people saw One Piece for the first time this way, and that I saw in a lot of the comment sections and various posts that there are a lot of people that are excited to dive into the anime now because they want to give it a real shot, and that is what I'm hoping for. So if you got all the way this far into the video, and you are a fan of this live action show, but you've never seen the One Piece anime, I highly recommend doing it. And I think part of the fun could be now that you could see the anime and then, watch the live action iteration as time goes on and see how you feel about the two side by side. As of right now, the One Piece anime is what I will continue to watch, and this just made me want to go back and revisit the original episodes. But I do think that there's definitely merits here, even if I wanted to go into this hating it, even if I thought it was going to be complete and utter dog shit. So without further ado, a big thanks to you guys for watching. Leave any and all comments down below. Hit that like button, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.